I think that storytelling, technique and ability is relevant across every stage of customer transformation. And I think helping employees be able to tell stories better and to recognize those stories as part of the process, I think is very helpful. Because again, as we kind of just outlined, they are going to be an essential part of being able to communicate what the customer wants and how you're going to execute on that throughout every team, throughout every stage of the journey, through the sales process, even through HR and hiring. You should be able to recognize and tell and share the stories of what your customers want.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I am Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is a customer experience expert, ex-head of business innovation and strategy at Google, and author of the book Customer Transformation. His education includes a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology from the University of Phoenix and an MBA in Business Administration and Management from Indiana Wesleyan University. Our guest's 35 years of experience in business development and digital strategy has involved roles at esteemed companies such as the Walt Disney Company, Electronic Arts, Universal Music Group, Fox Broadcasting Company, and Google, as we mentioned earlier. I have the privilege to bring you the host of the Chris Hood Digital Show podcast, a passionate gamer and an adjunct professor at the Southern New Hampshire University who has a deep love for storytelling. Chris Hood. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited.
That's good. All right, let's rip into it then. What were you excited about as a little kid and where did you grow up?
Oh, wow. What I would say that the thing that excited me the most, and there's some relevance in here, were movies. I absolutely loved movies. I loved going to the movies. I loved the popcorn and the candy. I'm a huge chocoholic, candy, so being able to sit in a dark theater and watch a story unfold and eat candy in the process, I loved it ever since I can remember. I grew up on the East Coast of the United States in a small little town in Massachusetts. And then through growing up over the years, we moved around a little bit and spent some time in New York and Ohio, and then ultimately found my way into California, the home of movies. And so I really got excited because I was here near Hollywood and could explore that movie industry a little bit more, all the way up to my very first job, which was actually working at a movie theater, because I continued to want to actually eat candy and sit in a dark space and watch movies.
All right. So can you recall your first ever movie that you watched?
I can't recall my first, but I will tell you the first movie that kind of shifts into my mind, and that was Star Trek, the original motion picture. And I was pretty young, but the only reason I remember this was because I fell asleep during the movie. I passed out, and it was a crowded theater, and we were in like the first one or two rows, and my parents were watching it, but I fell fast asleep. And so it's kind of comedy because I love watching movies. But yeah, I one of my first ones was falling asleep in the theater.
And an absolute classic of a movie as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And so were your parents really fascinated by movies too? I mean, quite often as kids, we are drawn to things that our parents either take us to or inspired by.
No, I actually think they probably took me to the theater because I liked it so much. And no, I can't really tell you where that came from, other than I learned at a very early age the art of storytelling, the passion behind hearing and listening to stories. And then as I started to grow up, even comic books and video games, all of them had this kind of story element behind them. And that was what fascinated me the most. It was the escapism. It was the leaving the confines of my world and going and exploring somebody else's world. And movies just brought all of that to life. So for my parents, yeah, they just kind of encouraged it because I think they felt, well, yeah, it's a form of entertainment. It's a form of storytelling. But for me, it really was. It was the world building wrapped around that storytelling that excited me the most.
All right, so you picked something here I really, really like, and that is the experience around the story. I mean, people will tell stories, but those who can create the experience where you feel like you're in it and as part of that world kind of transcends people in a way. And so that opportunity to go and work in those movie theaters, to see those, the different movies and get excited about it, for you, did you start to feel that connection between yourself and the person coming to the movie, the customer or the client, and be able to kind of share that experience with them to get them excited?
It's a great conversation, and a great question, because when we think about movie going, especially today, it tends to be a singular event, you and the screen, right? It's my escapism into the world. But when movies first came onto the scene, and definitely over the course of the 1900s to the 1950s, it was a community activity. And even if you remember going to the theater and standing in long lines for like Star Wars and going in and sitting in a crowded theater and everybody cheering together and everybody applauding and everybody crying at the exact same moments, that community experience was definitely part of the storytelling. But today, when we think about it, it's so internalized. Like, we are now watching movies more than ever on our couches with Netflix. Maybe we have a shared experience with somebody that we're watching that movie with. And even some of the platforms have started to integrate that community, such as let us watch the exact same movie at the exact same time. You're in your home and I'm in my home, but we can sync that up and share that experience. But there's nothing like a packed auditorium. And there was nothing like, and I'm sorry, but we have lost the days of standing in lines waiting to go see Star Wars or some blockbuster movie. Mm-hmm. Those were all integral parts of the story before we even got into the movie theater and into that auditorium to watch it. For me, there is this combination of, I loved that community involvement, but I also loved the idea of just exploring that world. There is still, we all look at things differently. We experience things differently. Your experience of watching Star Wars for the first time is probably different than my experience watching Star Wars for the first time. We could go both watch the exact same movies and you're going to get something different out of it than somebody else's. Somebody's going to say, oh my gosh, that was hilarious. And somebody else is going to say, yeah, but that was a drama, right? So we are all going to experience these things differently. And I think it's a foundational way of looking at how businesses have evolved also today. We can make that correlation between how we experience things individually, how we experience things as a community, and then how we experience things in our day-to-day lives that are more real, right? The experiences of consumerism, the experiences of, just watching TV, the experiences of going to a restaurant and eating. Eating is no different than a movie. You share a meal with a friend is different than if you go and you have McDonald's by yourself, right? But all of those experiences we can learn from, and that's really what fascinates me the most today, is unlocking and analyzing and experiencing different things from different perspectives so that we can bring it into how we operate our businesses.
Yeah, you're taking me back to some very vivid memories. Actually, I remember my very first movie. It was in like the town hall. You could hear the, not sure exactly what they were called. They were like kind of like tangy fruits that were like little balls that would be rolling down the hall, or you'd hear them fly over. Watching the movie for Trot Flats, which is an absolute icon movie in New Zealand. But I could also remember Star Wars, that first film, watching it. I didn't watch it at a movie theater, but I watched it on a couch. But I can vividly recall where I was sitting and who I was with. And it's that sense of people around you and that shared experience that we have. If we take that now into, say, the business world, where, quite often we've seen over the years, people talk about trying to make it more customer centric, but it's become more transaction centric. In many cases, where people have tried too hard to automate something or to speed up the process, but they take out that really human experience element and that community element, which I'd love to see a lot more of. And I know a lot more people are trying to do this, and the work you do is really trying to bring that back into what is the experience that we have. So how do we get people to shift their mindsets from thinking more of that customer transaction to a customer-centric experience focus?
Yeah, we talk about this in the movies that we've just experienced, right? We go into the movie theater, we sit down, we have popcorn, we eat candy, we escape into a different world. And we think that there's no correlation there, but there is. And this is one of the reasons why I took that experience, of my professional experience, and then began to apply it to other businesses. The stories and entertainment value that we want to get is no different than going to a website. A website is meant to entertain us or encourage us to facilitate whatever the transaction is. We are genuinely entertained when we're shopping on Amazon, right? And so there are definitely these correlations between going to a movie and then going and shopping online. And yet, again, it's a personal experience. It's an individual experience. We're not in a community sitting around shopping together, like we might do in the olden days. We would go to the mall and we would be with our friends and we would go shopping together. You could still do that today, but we've removed that, and it's now I'm sitting in front of a computer and I'm buying what I need to buy. And so there is a transactional piece that we have to think about, because we do want it to be as quick and effortless and easy and simple and fluid as possible, right? So if we were to say, well, look, your Amazon experience is only a couple of clicks, but we're going to add a couple of more clicks because we want to entertain you. I don't think that makes sense. But the recognition of what the consumer wants is the critical piece. Amazon has kind of ruined us. We have the expectation that I can simply go to any website, I can find what I want quickly, I can pop it in my cart and pay for it, and it's going to show up on my doorstep the next day. That's the Amazon experience. But we can't get that same experience for every single web property that we visit. Yeah. But we have to learn. We have to understand what that expectation is, and then figure out how we can make it seamless. It may still be transactional, but the transaction is in benefit of what the consumer wants. And so what I think a lot of organizations struggle with is things like, well, fill out this form. And the form is like your name and email address and address and shipping information. And all of a sudden you're presented with a form of 20 different questions. And all you're doing is frustrating that person who has to fill that out. You're right. You've got to start thinking about it with, well, what do I need right now? I tell everybody this. The only thing you need about a customer is their email. You don't need anything else, ever. Now, you can start asking more information as you progress. Hey, hi, email address, like, what can we call you? Like, what do you go by? Now we got your first name. Right? I don't need your billing address. You haven't ordered anything yet. And then when you get to the point where you've actually put something in your shop, now maybe I have to hey, I've got to ship this somewhere. Can you provide me more information? this can be progressive. It doesn't have to be all at once. And I think people focus so heavily on, I need all of the information as soon as possible so that I can then sell something to them. But you don't. And these types of subtle differences are what you have to think about. It's no different than you're not buying concession for your movie before you buy your ticket. You buy the ticket, then you go to the theater, and then maybe you buy concession, maybe don't. You can go sit down, you can find your seats, then maybe you come back out to buy concession. That experience is customizable based on your preferences. And again, if we think about it from an e-commerce perspective, too often you are presenting all these roadblocks like, no, you've got to tell me what movie you want to buy, what ticket, what seat you want, what you're going to buy a concession, where, you've got to tell me all this stuff ahead of time before we finish that transaction. And each time you do that, you are creating an experience that consumers don't want and are going to leave. So we can talk about that human connection because I think that's part of it. But I think the first step is to overly simplify the experience transactionally so that it's very smooth and seamless. And then we can layer on top of it some of the human conditions that people actually want and care about to make it even better.
I love that. Simplifying, in this world where it's so easy for us to make things complex, but so difficult to simplify things. Because we always want more. We say we want less, but we're always looking for more, which is important. For you, obviously, you would go back to where you were. You're coming in to working at a cinema, and from there, when did you decide? From there, you wanted to stay in that industry. From my understanding, and so how did that progress then from working in the local cinema to your next roles, your next career jobs?
So after the theater, I had an opportunity to, do a couple of things. I continued to work in film across some marketing opportunities. Then a music role materialized, and I was looking at it and said, music industry, that's interesting. I like music, but sure, I basically took that opportunity. Then there was a video game opportunity, mostly in customer support. And I was a huge fan of video games. So clearly there was a good fit there. Most of it stayed in entertainment, darting around again through music and video games, and then back into movies and then to TV. And I looked at all of it the same, really. Everything was a new opportunity, a new experience, and a new form of entertainment. But really, at the end of the day, they still sat in the space of storytelling and world building. I mean, music is storytelling, right? It's a different form of storytelling. If we think about even like Broadway shows and musical theater, it's an escapism into somebody else's world, and usually with a happy ending, unless you watch like Les Miserables or something, which everybody dies. But, anyway, there's still storytelling, there's still world building, and there's still an experience that is a part of it, an emotional experience that we get connected to. So I looked at all of those as opportunities to continue to explore that process. And then I think it wasn't until I really looked at it differently from a business perspective, even though I was still in entertainment, I saw the business side of it. And I recognized that this form of entertainment was very beneficial to businesses who were trying to connect with consumers and trying to find new ways to engage with them and make it interactive and make it easy for them to understand so that they would buy. And I think as I was able to start to look even at the boom of the .com, when websites became, more of a reality. Everybody was like, hey, we need to build a website. It was all forms of entertainment, right? And I think that business side of things really was when I found my sweet spot, because I could start to bridge the gap between really the entertainment and the business and the technology sides. As you mentioned in the opening, I have a bachelor's in technology. And I acted as really a translator. I was trying to demonstrate how technology could be used for entertainment and how entertainment was beneficial to business and how business could benefit by leveraging the technology, right? And everything I did after that was just acting as kind of this translator to help people and businesses understand the values of storytelling and world building and experiences and consumer centric approaches.
Yeah. So fast forward to now, we've now got a world which seems to be changing pretty quick. We're seeing a lot more businesses talk about new technologies. We're talking about artificial intelligence, which has obviously been around for a long time, but talking about the generative artificial intelligence, that seems to be the buzzword of last year. Still kind of figuring out what this year's the key word is, but it's interesting to see how a lot of companies are trying to grapple with this right now, connect it through from not only a business point of view, an employee point of view, but also with that customer. What are you seeing that is still similar now that hasn't changed, whether there's technology there or not, that is important in that connection between business, employee, and the consumer?
The big one, which is you have a business, which means you have customers. And if you don't have customers, you don't have a business.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's pretty straightforward. And so if you kind of paint that picture and you say, well, if I don't have customers, I don't have a business, then your first priority for any business is to ensure that you have customers and that you are satisfying those customers. And I think what a lot of organizations start to do is they start taking their customers for granted. They feel like, well, we've got a product. And sure, if you look at some of the big organizations like McDonald's as an example, it seems like they have an endless supply of customers, but they also have a product that meets a specific need and demand, and that's why they have those customers. And they do a pretty good job of trying to continuously innovate and make those customers happy. But we have seen over the last 2 years examples of businesses who take their customers for granted, and as a result, they've lost a big portion of their marketplace, and they probably will struggle getting those customers back. So it is critical to understand that your customer is your number one priority, no matter what. And then in order to ensure that those customers are happy and that their needs are being met, and that you are continuously evolving based on how the trends in the marketplace are occurring as well, you've got to employ a whole bunch of strategies and techniques in that process. And you have to build companies and cultures within your organization, which means that your employees also have to be equally satisfied and understand the criticality of meeting those customers' needs. And this synergy starts to work where, and when we see it, we know that there's a direct correlation between employee happiness, employee satisfaction, and customer satisfaction, especially in retail. If you've ever walked into a store and you look at it for a salesperson, you have a question and you got somebody who's grumpy and doesn't want to help you and maybe even avoid you, and you're like, where is somebody who can help me? Your experience starts to decline. But if you've got somebody who is there and happy and willing to help you and is supportive and is excited to be at their job, they're there to help, and that experience improves. So all of this relationship between the employee and the business and customer satisfaction has to be part of your daily operations. And if it's not, you're going to struggle. And you also have to recognize, you outlined it, that in today's digital age, that preference and the customer need is ever evolving. It's continuous. It's a motion that has to be understood, analyzed, and adapted to, because if you're not, and you get into the mindset of, well, we've always done things this way, then those customers are going to get frustrated. Your employees are not going to know what to do. and they're going to get frustrated. And ultimately, you're going to lose customers in the process.
Which is no good for anyone if we're losing customers. When you talk about, obviously employee satisfaction for a number of companies industries that are being disrupted quite heavily by technology, replacing humans in certain roles that, don't require human input or considered don't require human input to be able to deliver on. How do we keep them motivated and satisfied when their jobs have been taken up by a computer or a software or something digital to then even match what the customer requires?
Yeah, I mean, a common example of this is in customer support. Like it's interesting because if your customer is your number one priority, it's amazing how little businesses actually invest in customer support. And even to the point where we see a lot of organizations that are letting go their customer support teams and customer service teams for artificial intelligence. It's a great example. Like, well, why do we need a customer support staff when we can use artificial intelligence who's going to be able to answer all those questions?
Yeah.
But what we're actually seeing is that consumers are getting frustrated by those experiences, and then they are leaving the business and they're going off somewhere else, and they're going to your competitors because they just don't want to have to deal with a robot. And proof of this is in some businesses that are now leveraging their employees and customer support agents as differentiation in the marketplace. The Discover card is a great example of this. Here in the United States, we recently had the Super Bowl, and one of the biggest commercials was Discover, and this scenario where a customer called in and says, "Hey, you sound like a real person, not a robot." And they're like, no, we are a real person, right? And they're making fun of it because they can tell, they see in their research, in their analysis, and in their growth that by having real people answer real questions by real customers, they are actually able to increase customer satisfaction and loyalty and generate more customers to their business. And we see that the reverse. Yes, you may speed up the query process for problems. Yes, you may get more accurate answers by an AI than a real person, but at what cost?
Yeah.
We know for a fact now that consumers do not want to speak with a robot, with a chatbot, with an AI. They are getting frustrated. The number of times we call in and we're like, hit zero, real person, hit 0, 0, 0. We're always hitting as many buttons as possible to reach a real person because every single one of our experiences are unique.
Yeah.
Every single one of the scenarios is unique. You can't sit here and suggest that, you know what, I'm going to be placed in a bucket where I have the exact same problem as everybody else.
Yeah.
Or some of the stuff like reset my password. Sure, go for it. Do it. But for the big stuff, you need to have that person involved. And AI and any other type of technology is not going to be able to facilitate the empathetic needs that we need as consumers.
Yeah, I think it's important. For me, I spend a bit of time thinking about it when I'm on these calls with or I'm interacting either with a robot or I'm interacting with a human being. I'm always kind of considering, all right, where's the frustration point here? What could the intersection be between both? There's some times where I've had to go between 5 people online to solve something that should take less than 30 seconds to do online, but I can't do it online. And so I think it's important for organizations to really consider how the intersection of both the technology and the human in being able to solve problems, because the last thing you want is to go from 5 people be on a call for 45 minutes when you could have solved it in 30 seconds.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier. There is a time and place to do it. Here's a common scenario for a lot of companies. You have a customer. Unfortunately, they wanted to cancel their agreement, whatever it is, cancel their contract, discontinue their service. And instead of having a way online for them to just go in and say cancel, you require them to call in and talk to a person.
Yes.
Now, I know that you're doing that because you're trying to entice them to stay as a customer. But what you're actually doing is you are building in validation that I absolutely want to cancel my contract.
Yeah.
So instead of giving them some easy way to approach that with maybe some easy alternatives to come back when they're ready, no, you've just further alienated them by saying, we're not going to provide you with the technology when you want it, and we're going to put up another gateway to talk to a real person when we don't want to talk to a real person. And this balance between when is it appropriate to talk to a real person and when is it not appropriate to talk to a real person is the problem that I think a lot of businesses struggle with. And that is a deep analysis that you have to go through ultimately to serve your customer, even if they don't want to be your customer anymore.
There you go. There's some technology for someone out there to try and figure out how to build, how to determine what does the customer want to talk to a human about and what don't they want to talk about it, and be able to solve that one. To be good. Now we look at, when you look at, say, the customer and making sure they're front and center of mind. Quite often we see organizations or people listen to a customer or get feedback from a customer and react on that rather than respond appropriately to kind of go a bit deeper and really find out what the root cause is. When we're looking at our businesses or we're looking at our products or service lines that we offer, in regards to thinking about how do we make changes based on interactions with the customer, what are some things we need to consider?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. So I think it's really interesting that you said, sometimes we react to what a customer wants, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. You may empower your employees to be able to respond to customer needs within the moment that they need something, but all of this is data, right? So it's not necessarily just one customer who has a complaint or one customer who has a need. It's let's look at that and see, are there other customers that have the same problem? Is there other customers that have the same feature request? And as we start to build that case, we have to take all of that data into consideration. So instead of one, do we have 100? Instead of 100, do we have 1,000? Like, do we have 5,000 customers who are saying the exact same thing? If we can start building a mass of data that proves what we want, that's something we need to look at. So you can absolutely go and look at what one customer says about something, but that should be, just another data point. That should be something else that you take in consideration. Obviously, if you're, say, in retail and a customer comes up to you and is complaining and you're trying to manage that, you probably already have regulations, rules, processes in place to be able to understand how to respond to that one customer. But that data point, that engagement should still be taken and put into a system where you can then further analyze it. How many times have we had somebody come up in our stores and complain about this one thing? A lot, not, only that one time. So the data is a critical part of it. We can't make biased decisions when it comes to our customers. And I think the biggest challenge that a lot of larger organizations have is they just jump to a conclusion. Oh, I was talking to a customer and they told me this, so I've decided we're going to implement this new strategy. Right. Well, for one customer, right? Or I even have, worse scenarios where it's an executive who's at, in a leadership position at a company and says, well, my opinion is we need to do this, so we're going to go do that. Well, do you have data to back that up? If you don't have the data to validate what your direction is, then again, you're most likely going to lose customers in the process. You can't just make decisions because they're your decisions, because they're the best decisions, because they're the decisions in the moment. The data has to be part of the decision-making process. So accumulate that information, accumulate that feedback, look at multiple sources, analyze the data, and then make decisions for your consumers based on the data.
I think it's really, really valid. We have a lot of data out there, but sometimes we get a bit overwhelmed with the data, but it's about understanding what data is important. And when it comes to, I like this approach here where you record that data down based on feedback from customers or clients and look for the trends, not look for the outliers, so to speak, because the outliers, could, or, in maybe a small percentage of them could be useful, but in many cases, they're just an outlying of something that's just happened. So let's focus on taking the right risks if it goes to changing something or altering something or destroying and then starting something new when it comes to a company. And I mean, you look at, say, Kodak, for instance, they were at a point, if we talk about where they were with their cameras, etc., where they may have had, there may not be actually critical data out there to say, hey, we should go to digital. But how do you make that change, that innovation, when there may not actually be the data there to say, hey, we need to do something differently?
It's a hard one, right? Because I think a lot of businesses start to think, here's a good example, a broader example. When the iPhone came out by Apple, there is now an app marketplace, and there is an entire marketing, trend of, oh, I need an app for that, right? And so everybody was running around like, oh, we need to build an app. We need to build an app. We're doing the same thing right now with AI. The number of people out there that's like, oh, well, we need AI. We've got to implement AI. Why? Like, why? It still goes back to the question, are your consumers asking for it? Yeah. And this is hard. It is hard to understand at what point in time your consumers are asking for it and at what point in time that technology is revolutionizing, changing, disrupting the marketplace. And so, we could take a look at like Uber, and all of a sudden Uber is completely disrupting transportation. And somebody might say, well, they just decided to do that. Well, they didn't. They actually asked consumers. They were the consumers themselves, but they actually started to, as you're standing in line and talking to people waiting for their taxis, and you're hearing news stories and you're looking at the trends in the marketplace, and you're seeing that people are getting frustrated or they're getting scammed or they're getting any number of things. And somebody says, well, isn't there a better way to do that? That was their market research. That was their analysis. And just because we might not have data points that show that specific technologies are what consumers want, we can still go and talk to consumers about what their frustrations are and then try to figure out if there's a matching technology. This is something that I've written in my book, where a lot of businesses start with the technology. They say, hey, we need AI. Let's go get AI. Everybody's talking about AI. We need AI. But they don't have any idea how they're going to implement that AI to their consumer base. Whereas what you really need to do is you need to ask your consumer base, what are the problems that you are having? What are you trying to accomplish? Without even thinking about the technology. And then once you understand what the problem is, like Uber, I don't like waiting in line for a taxi. That's the problem. Well, now we can start thinking about, well, what technologies are available and what technologies can we implement to solve that problem? It always has to start with the customer and the customer problem first. And then we figure out what the technologies are available and what technologies we can use to solve that problem. If you do it in reverse, if you go and you think about the technology first before understanding the problem, then all you are doing is wasting time and money in your organization.
Yeah, it's a good point. And to make sure that you really understand what their problem is, if we look back to that famous quote by Henry Ford in regards to if we asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so sometimes we can have the data there, but the data might be a little bit shallow. So how can we actually go a little bit deeper? And so when we kind of understand we might have a thread that is common in the data from our clients or our customers. What things do we need to do next to make sure we're actually identifying what the real root cause or real problem is, rather than just what the surface level is showing us?
So real quickly on that Ford comment, I actually wrote a piece on this a couple of weeks ago. It's on my LinkedIn and on my website. You can go and find it. But there is actually been some research that suggests that Henry Ford actually never said that, which is amazing within itself. And there's some really strong research to demonstrate that. But I always go back to the fact that Ford actually did give them better horses. It's what we call horsepower today. It's in our cars. He still solved the problem. He still recognized that the problem was we want to go faster. Yeah. And he leveraged new technology to build that, right? So I think it's a critical component of recognizing, again, what that consumer problem is and then being able to go about and solving it. And I think in anything else that we do have to still maintain that recognition of what is the data telling us? What is the market telling us? What are the trends in the marketplace? What is the research? What are customers asking for? What are customers demanding? Most businesses have that. Most businesses have the feedback as part of that process. And you've just got to constantly stay on top of it. It's going to change. You've got to be agile. You've got to recognize that is constantly changing, and then be able to adjust and change with it.
We've talked a little bit here around, that we're seeing that people want to speak to humans a lot more in customer support. What else are you seeing at the moment or future trends around customers that we need to be aware of as businesses?
Well, I do think AI will continue to evolve. Like AI is going to become a big part of our lives. And I kind of look at it, though, as AI has to become a more personalized experience. It's got to become a personalized agent. A good way of looking at this is right now, most of us worldwide have devices in our hands. We have a phone. Now, if I replace this conceptually as it's no longer a device in my hand, it's no longer a phone, but it's an artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of different ways that we could package that and look at that. And yes, AI could be a part of my device. AI could be in my phone. But I think actually we are going to probably see that in a different format than just our phones, because I think even our phones, our devices, those are going to change. We've already started to see things like the metaverse and virtual reality and AI having glasses. And, I think the overall experience of what that is probably going to evolve a little bit. But if you can imagine a personalized artificial intelligence agent that can do things on our behalf and can go with us no matter what the interface is, that's kind of where we're headed. So that AI, again, as an example, I have my phone. If I go and get into my car, I connect my phone to my car, and usually it's done by Bluetooth. And now I can get my music, and the music is served through Bluetooth into my car. And maybe my car is advanced enough that it has a connected experience. And a lot of times the connected experience in my car is different than my phone. And we've got these synchronization problems. I might have a map system in my car, and then I also have a map system on my phone. Like, how do we simplify that experience? Well, now imagine I have an AI agent, and that AI agent basically follows me around. And when I get into my car, that AI agent lives in my car. And when I leave my car, that AI agent, basically follows me around and can do things and interact with me and engage with me, so that as I need things, whether it's through something I wear or through some other type of device, I can share notes with it. It can communicate with other AI agents. When I'm in the store, it can facilitate transactions. Digital wallets become kind of a thing of the past. So I do think that kind of experience is going to evolve as we move forward, and it's going to become more intelligent and more smarter about what we can engage with. But I think the confines of those transactions have to be eliminated. Everything today is a siloed experience if we really kind of break this down. Think about anytime you've gone on a vacation or you've gone on a business trip. The experience is usually, I book my airline ticket. That's one siloed experience. I book my hotel rooms. That's a siloed experience. I get to the airport. I get a taxi or an Uber. That's a siloed experience. I go out for dinner. That's a siloed experience. Like we're living in these kind of loosely connected siloed experiences. When we break down those walls so that my entire vacation experience between booking a flight and hotel and Uber and going out for dinner is one seamless experience technology-wise, now we are in a world that makes a lot more sense for the journeys that we go through on an individual basis.
Yeah, like I want to go from Sydney to Los Angeles to, a certain area, find me the best options for flight, accommodation, Uber, and restaurant, like type thing. And just it can automatically bring that to you. I think obviously we're seeing some websites, but you kind of got to do one thing at a time versus it literally all just popping up and going, here it is for you. So I think that's exciting. I think that's good. When you look at the customer transformation framework that you've created, the 7 stages strategy from customer alignment to business value, can you share with us what those 7 steps are, what they mean, and why they're kind of designed in a certain order?
Yeah. So really quickly, the 7 stages are customer, interface, journey, ecosystem, culture, technology, and business. And so if I give you a little bit more context for each, we start with the customer because you always have to start with your customer. The interface, stage 2, is how does the customer interface with your business and how does the business interface with you? And we just kind of touched on that a little bit with our vacationing example. We use a mobile device to book an Uber or, website to make a dinner reservation. What if I told you that you had to create an interface for your customers that did not include a mobile application, a mobile device, or a website? What would you do? And how would that look? That's the interface piece. Journey, that's our typical customer journeys, how we experience and connect with businesses that we engage with. Ecosystem is all about the community development as well as partnerships. What kind of partnerships can we build to enhance the overall customer experience and journey? And then also that community, how do we engage with the community to help grow loyalty in that process? The culture is all around building customer-centric cultures and recognizing how employees must be praised in order to facilitate positive interactions with your customers. And this is also a recognition that customer-centric organizations and cultures means that customer experience is everyone's responsibility throughout the entire organization and not just customer-facing roles, which I think a lot of times businesses get hung up on. And then we get to the technology. We've gone all the way through until we finally decide what technologies we're going to use to build some of these experiences. And of course, this is also where data-driven decision-making is happening. And then the last one is the business itself and business value and making sure that the business is aligned back to the customer and how do you grow and build your business and scale your business from there.
Sure.
Now, real quickly, that entire process works on what we call the outside-in perspective. It starts outside your organization with the customer and works all the way inside the business to your business itself. And if we were to reverse this and we were to go, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, if we were to reverse this, and a lot of people do, they start with the business idea and then they figure out the technology and they work from the inside out. Here's my business. Here's the technology I want to build. Then you go in and you hire some employees, and then you figure out some partnerships, and then you're starting to struggle with what the journey is. And then you're trying to figure out how the interface, and then you're asking the question, well, who is our customer? Well, you've already built everything before you understand who your customer base is. And I've seen it before, and they struggle. And, you've got to basically start all over. So that's why it's ordered in the way it is. And those are the 7 stages.
Yeah, great. So if someone like is a leader, a CEO of an organization, they're wanting to shift to a more customer-centric or client-centric type culture and organization, where would they start? Like, is it literally going through those 7 steps? Is there another way to kind of look at it? How would you approach it?
Yeah, well, the good news is I wrote a book with a framework that helps you do it, right? So you can absolutely go and pick up a copy of my book and then follow through. And the book has the framework, as well as after each stage of the customer transformation process, there is a workshop and action plans that you can follow. So there's clear steps, questions, next steps, everything that you can do within your company to help do this. But if you don't want to buy my book, which is unfortunate, but if you don't do that and you just want to kind of go through the process, you do ultimately have to start with your customers. You have to start to ask the right questions, include them in the process, start to better understand the problems and the needs, even the aspirations that they have, and then begin to understand how you are going to build this out through whether you use my 7 steps or somebody else's 7 steps or other, frameworks that might be out there. You still start with your customer, start to understand what their journey is, how they want to interface with you, and then build it out and grow the internal culture to also support it. Those are the critical pieces. And then if you do that consistently and then you should actually see business growth.
Is there any need to kind of look at your organization where it's currently at first before you go to the customer? Or do you feel it's literally leave what you've got, let's go focus on the customer, and then come back to where you are now?
So on my website, I actually have a maturity assessment that will take you through these 7 stages. And you could ask, there's some basic questions. There's 14 questions, multiple choice. You can go through them, answer those, and it will give you a scale as to where you are in terms of strength and weaknesses currently in that process. But the framework is actually pretty adaptable. So let's say you feel you're very strong on the journey piece of this. Well, yeah, skip over it. Like just, go with the customer, start thinking about it. A lot of times I'll go and I'll consult and they'll say, yeah, we've got this section down. We've got, we're comfortable with this section. Well, that's fine. Then let's just focus on the areas that you don't think, you are mature on, but also recognize that just because you think you might be mature in a specific area, oftentimes when I start asking the questions, we'll realize that you really aren't as mature as you think you are. And it's very common. I'll go into an organization and I'll say, how many people in the audience feel that you're very strong with the customer satisfaction and experience? And they'll all raise their hand. And then by the time we get through the workshop, I'll ask it again. Now that you've gone through the workshop, how far, and how well do you think you're doing? And most people will lower their hands at that point in time and say, yeah, we're not there yet. There's a lot of opportunity and growth. So, again, pick up a copy of the book and you will really be able to dive in to see if you're doing it holistically and as deeply as what I've painted.
If we go back to right where we started today, we talked a lot about storytelling at the beginning. And when we think about this customer transformation, we've obviously got to bring our employees along the journey as well. Yes, we might get all the data along the way, we might have some ideas, but if they can't visualize it, then it's hard to get buy-in from them. So how do you integrate storytelling into the customer transformation process?
Well, storytelling is a part of every stage of it. I think even from a software development perspective, like anybody who's ever been involved with software development, we have what is called user stories. We build software because we have a user story that explains a specific feature in that tool that we want to build. And so I think we have stories when we better understand who our customer is. We have stories when we think about how they're interfacing. We have definitely stories as part of the journey mapping exercises. Communities are all about sharing stories about positive experiences and even negative experiences, which are all learning opportunities. So I think that storytelling, technique and ability is relevant across every stage of customer transformation. And I think helping employees be able to tell stories better and to recognize those stories as part of the process, I think is very helpful. Because again, as we kind of just outlined, they are going to be an essential part of being able to communicate what the customer wants and how you're going to execute on that throughout every team, throughout every stage of the journey, through the sales process, even through HR and hiring. You should be able to recognize and tell and share the stories of what your customers want.
It's interesting when we work a lot in corporate space around working with people on presentation training and communication and storytelling, and quite often we'll get 90% of people plus will they all say, we know that business storytelling or storytelling is really, really important in the workplace, but only about 10% use it. And so it's still a big mindset shift for people to go from that logic, here are the facts and figures, to actually go, we need to be able to visualize this change as well. So there seems to be a few barriers that people really struggle with still. So how can, if we've got people in our organization, we want to get into sharing stories more often and be able to paint those pictures. From your perspective, do you have any tips around how do we influence people to be able to feel more comfortable in sharing stories?
Ban presentations. I think if we could just do away with decks and presentations and slides and leave it to stories, we would all be much better off. The number of times that I've gone into meetings, even my own meetings, or especially at Google, we've all been there. We've all gone to like a sales meeting or a business meeting, and somebody's got a deck up on the screen, and all they're doing is reading through the deck, and they've got a script in their head. I've got to cover this, and I've got to get that ding, 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 and and just nail it off, and then they feel like, well, man, I nailed that. Like, yeah, it was kind of boring, and no one was reading, along, and everybody tuned out at some point in time. Mm-hmm. Like I'm telling you, like if we could do away with slides and presentations, we would all be much better and happier. So I think, putting that aside, because the slides and the presentations are clutches for a lot of people, like they need that there. But even simple things like, okay, great, thank you for your presentation. Like if I was sitting down with my team, I would say, okay, you've got a slide, you've got a presentation, there's 5 slides, present it to me. They're going to read through it. And I said, okay, now tell me everything you just said without the slides. Like, I think those types of conversations and training opportunities to explore, like, well, tell me a story, like, tell me an experience, like, tell me something that you specifically experienced that is relevant to this. And we all have them. We all have our own individual stories. We tell them all the time without even realizing that we're telling stories. Anytime you tell, you call up your friend and like, what have you been up to? Well, let me tell you, you're telling a story. Like those experiences can be translated into real world opportunities for business. And you've got to make that correlation, but you only can make the correlation if somebody is sitting there saying telling you that, put the slides away, tell me a story, like tell me an experience, tell me an example of how this is relevant. And I think if we can do that more, then yeah, I think we can get a lot better at the storytelling and definitely getting in tune with what the customer wants, because that's really what it's all about.
It's all about the customer. It was beautiful. We all know that smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions. When was the last time you did something for the first time?
The last time I did something for the first time. Well, last night I made some pasta and I did carbonara. So that requires an egg whisk and then some water and trying not to make scrambled eggs in the process. I do a lot of cooking and baking. That was actually the first time I made that dish. And I was petrified that I was going to actually make scrambled eggs in the process. But it came out great and it tasted awesome. So that was just last night.
I like that answer.
See? Completely random, right?
No, it's good. It's good. What is the one question that you would love to solve?
A cure for cancer would probably, I don't know if that's a question or if that's just something I would like to solve. The meaning of life, and that's always a good one. How to quickly get funding, for a business. That's another good one that I would love to answer or solve. What's the future? I think everybody's wondering what the future is. Time travel possible? I'm a big believer in time travel. So, I think a lot of the questions that I have are definitely that borderline of science fiction and reality. And, can we make it can teleportation be a reality? Can we make an actual, going all the way back to Star Trek, since that was my first movie, in Star Trek, we've got the rooms that you can walk into, and everything becomes, what are those things called again? Oh man, this is bad that I can't remember. The holodecks, can we actually make a holodeck? That would be cool. My personal opinion is I actually don't think virtual reality is going to become a thing of our future. But if we can get to holodecks where we can actually walk into a room and experience something as if it was real without any additional gadgets on our heads and faces, and have real world smells and sounds and actual touch and experience, like Star Trek's holodecks, that would be awesome. If I can see that in our future, tell me how to do it. I'm all in.
Hyper personalized as well.
Yeah.
For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who is a great example of this for you?
I've always been a fan of Albert Einstein. Always. I think he would, the other question that often gets asked is who would you like to have a meal with, like lunch or whatever, sit down. I think he would just be a fabulous person to sit down and have a conversation with and just explore the what ifs. I'm a big believer and I think a lot about the what ifs, as we just kind of talked about. Albert Einstein would definitely be up there. I mean, I think a lot of my inspiration and a lot of the way I look at things come from my father. He was, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was always, an inspiration in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit and the opportunities to build and the thought of building worlds. I definitely think I got a lot of that inspiration from him. So yeah, between my dad and Albert Einstein, and Walt Disney. Walt Disney is also a big favorite of mine. Obviously, Disney and the creation process and that world building mentality and the customer experience was all rooted in Walt Disney.
Beautiful examples. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. How can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
The best way for people to connect is on my website at chrishood.com, CHRISHOOD.com. And on there, you can learn more about me. You can find a copy of my book. You can find my podcast, all of my social media profiles. Really, everything you need to know is right there, handy dandy, chrishood.com.
We'll put those links in the show notes to make it a little bit easier for everyone to find chrishood.com. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I have thoroughly enjoyed you taking us back into your childhood and the fascination you had with the of movies and how that transcended you into different experiences and other worlds or other people's worlds, to then looking at how you could then bring story to life inside business and their beautiful connection to the importance and relevance of the customer being at the heart and soul of everything we do as employees and business leaders and industries in the world, to consider how can we make things easier, how make things better, make things more entertaining or more fun along the way too, so that we can have this beautiful human experience rather than maybe having a transaction all the time. I love your framework, the very simple 7 steps there as part of that customer transformation process of customers, interfaces, the journeys, the ecosystems, the culture, technology, and then finally finishing with the business as we think from the outside in. And I think too often we get caught up on the inside and then try to project that to the outside versus coming the other way. And so really refreshing in the way that you approach this. I look forward to getting a chance to fully read the book and being able to dive deep into it because a lot of things resonated with me. So thanks for your time today, Chris. Lots of great insights and looking forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you as well.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.